My name is Jeff Park. I'm CTO at HDMI Licensing. So HDMI Licensing, short, we call ourselves HDMI LA. So that's short for HDMI Licensing Administrator. So what we do is we are the creators of HDMI technology. So it's not just a cable, but it's a whole suite of technology because it goes into devices, displays, source devices, game consoles. So we publish the specification. The specification is a series of documents that tell manufacturers how to build HDMI stuff. And then we also publish test specifications. So what we have is called compliance test specifications, and that basically requires so within HDMI world, if you build an HDMI product, you have to get it tested. It's not an option. There's a compliance test requirement. So that compliance test tells the manufacturer how to test. So everything from cables, connectors, all the way to giant TVs, right? So we do this to ensure that whether you buy, Jeff's TV or Rollers TV or Next TV, it doesn't matter. It all works together, regardless of the brand, regardless of the manufacturer, because they're all building towards the same specification and they are tested the same way. So that's what we are, and that's what we do. Is one of the main things is to make sure that products have compliance. So if there's any issues, we investigate, to take any appropriate action, work with the manufacturer if necessary. Not everybody's a good guy, right? So we do have to put the hammer down sometimes. We actually do work with Customs and Border and other government agencies to seize products at the border if there's any problems, right? So those unpleasant stuff I don't like to talk about. That's let my compliance guys deal with that. So when two devices connect, there are a series of things that needs to be done, and those serious things that needs to be done not only specified within the specification documents, but actually verified. Because the manufacturer says, "Oh, I'm the best at making something." Okay, that's nice, but we want to also trust and verify, right? You hear that all the time. So I think that is a key component to kind of HDMI success. And I think to your point is that people don't even think about the complexity. And that means we're, doing our job, right? Because at the end of the day, regardless of how great the technology is, but if it's complicated to use, no one's going to use it, right? So with HDMI, now with HDMI 2.1, you're pushing 48 gigabits now of bandwidth. I mean, that's like Google data center in the backyard, right? I mean, that's like crazy in terms of numbers. I mean, as a geek, myself as a nerd, I'm like, that's crazy numbers, but my mom doesn't care. My wife doesn't care. Plug it in, it should just work, right? Regardless of all the features that's in there, all the complexity in there. I mean, I'm a PC guy, PC gamer, so I love to nerd out about all the, hardware and little changes here and there to overclock, give me 10% more, those kind of things. Most people don't care. And I think HDMI was created with that kind of mindset in trying to build a technology and deliver experiences without having people even think about it. Just they see the cable, plug it in, it just works, and that's our ultimate goal. So physically, the cable looks exactly the same since 2003 when we first launched HDMI back in the HD days, HDTV days. So physically, it looks the same. The connector, everything doesn't change. However, the requirements for the specification and the amount of data and the testing requirement has gone up significantly. So while the physically looks the same, but the amount of testing and the construction of it has changed significantly. So what that means is when HDMI was first launched, in terms of raw numbers, the bandwidth required to pass through that copper wire was about 5 gigs. Now we're at 48 gigs. And you can't ask a 5 gig cable to pass 48 gigs. It's right. I mean, you might get lucky. I mean, you might have a cable guy who overbuilt their cable back in the day, and then it works. Theoretically, on paper, I can't argue against that because in theory it's possible, right? But the reality is, everybody makes it just enough so they can pass the testing, right? Because they want to save cost and manufacturing and whatnot. So now what we have is when we first started, we had HDMI cables, and then when we launched, you guys remember PS3? PS3 was one of the first ones to have like deep color, like 10-bit color, and just 1080p, and just that generation of stuff. And that's when we doubled the bandwidth, and that was 10.2 gigabits, and that's when we released a new type of cable called high-speed cable. So high-speed cable, or again, tested higher, physically looks the same, backwards compatible, there's no physical change, but again, tested and constructed with higher quality. And those testing requirements, those specifications were used for those cables. And now move forward to when HDMI 2 was released, then we started having 4K 60. That's when 4K 60 came out. And then we had premium HDMI cables. So the premium high-speed HDMI cables were the next generation cables. Again, physically the same, but higher testing requirements. Now, fast forward to today with HDMI 2.1, now we're pushing 8K, 4K 120, and the next level experience. So in conjunction with that, to support those higher bandwidth up to 48 gigabits, we updated our spec and released the specification for what we call ultra high-speed HDMI cables. So ultra high-speed HDMI cables now are certified. And if you go to hdmi.org, there are explainers on the cable, and anybody who's interested can go to the HDMI 2.1 section. And if you check out the cable section, it's like scroll down a little bit. Yeah, go to specification at the very top. Yeah, and then go to yeah, 2.0, yeah, and then overview on the right, yeah, and then scroll down. See right there. So all ultra high-speed HDMI cables are now certified. So what that means is, regardless of who you buy it from, they will have this label if they've gone through the full testing, and it's a pretty stringent testing for cables. So every length, every model, or whatever it is from the manufacturer, if they've gone through the full compliance testing and certification, then they would have these labels. And these labels are quite unique in that theoretically, I mean, you can copy it, but if you look at that shield is actually a hologram if you look at the physical label. And so it's a combination with that QR code and that holographic seal. It's registered through us. Manufacturers can only get this label through us, and we did that to ensure that to minimize counterfeit, right? And to ensure that consumers have the best experience. Because no longer are we pushing like 5, 10 gigabits, we're talking 48 gigabits, right? So the margins of errors are very, very light. Because honestly speaking, back in the day, I mean, you can probably get away with hand soldering a cable to get 10 gigabits, if maybe half the time, right? So a lot of people may not even realize, right, that they had a bad cable because they weren't pushing the limits. Now we're getting to a point where we're really pushing the limits of what a copper cable can do. So now we ensure with this program and the labeling program that cables are actually certified and that we can track that too, because we do auditing and making sure cable, they don't just test one cable that's perfect. What we'll typically in the industry call golden sample. So they have one golden sample that passes, and then all of a sudden they change the design, right? We've seen that too, right? So in order to keep the manufacturers honest, I mean, most of them don't do that. It's the questionable ones with any industry. There's always, bad apples, right? So that's why we also do market audits. So market audits are, we randomly buy cables and test them to make sure they actually do what they say they're supposed to do, right? Especially with these ultra high-speed cables. And so far, manufacturers have been releasing these slowly, and some of the cables are already bundled, right? So depending on your device. So, but these cables are kind of what you would need going forward to really push the envelope in terms of resolution and frame rate.